Okay. Okay. Good evening.
Good evening.
If you'd like to go ahead and begin your presentation, that would be great.
Sure. First of all, I just wanted to introduce Taylor
Hi,
from
Taylor.
Logan Simpson. And thank you all for finding the time and allowing us to take an hour of your time to show you what we've been working on, where we're at right now, and where we're gonna be going after this for the Parks, Recreation, Trails, and Open Space Master Plan.
Yeah, thank you so much. Make sure to speak into the mic. Yeah, I just want to echo Cindy's appreciation for your extra time tonight in addition to your regularly scheduled meetings. So again, I'm Taylor Broyhill with Logan Simpson and excited to give you an update on the Parks, Recreation, Open Space and Trails planning process. Primarily tonight we'll be highlighting many of the we lost connection again. Preliminary recommendations that have emerged through our planning process thus far. Okay, you can work your magic. All right. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, we'll just go over the agenda really quickly, what I'll cover. So like I said, I'll highlight where we've come thus far in the planning process, where we are right now, and along the way highlight our community engagement results. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time tonight covering some of the sort of the big ideas and the preliminary recommendations that have emerged through our work thus far. And then we'll have time after presenting those, that'll be 20 to 30 minutes covering all of that. And then we'll have time for discussion, for questions, and we can cycle back through the slides to cover any, thank you, concepts or ideas that you would like to spend more time discussing.
I'll take it from the back. If you need me, I'll holler back then.
Okay. So, if you want to go to the timeline slide. Great. So we kicked off the planning process in June and are working through a multi-phase process, essentially covering 12 months, which is typical of a plan of this nature in scope. And we spent the summer and the fall, our team at Logan Simpson conducting site visits, doing our own technical analysis and research, but most importantly, really engaging the community and listening to really what their preferences, their ideas, and their vision for the future of Parks, Recreation, Open Space, and Trails is in Woodland Park. And so we've made significant progress on that front. And you can see sort of where we are here now is in between two phases. So we're kind of at a transition point in the planning process where we're shifting from all of this information that we've collected and community input and translating that into concrete actions and recommendations. Next slide, please. So this slide summarizes our engagement strategy for the planning process. We've concluded the first stage, which is the listening stage, just reaching out to the community and hearing what they have to say. We did that through in-person and online outreach strategies, including early on, many of you all completing a direction setting survey for us, which was really helpful in providing that direction as we started the planning process. We held stakeholder focus groups, had a pop-up booth at the farmers market, and we also conducted a large community-wide online questionnaire in August and September. And those outreach efforts are really foundational in informing the ideas that I'll present to you tonight. So that's really the source of a lot of these concepts that have come from the community. And then the final piece of that was convening a technical advisory committee comprised of local and area professionals in Parks, Recreation, Open Space, and Trails, and existing partner agencies and future partner agencies potentially for the city as well. So they've been involved as well in advising this planning process. Next slide, please. So just to highlight, put some numbers to our engagement thus far through the first phase, we've engaged approximately 759 community members through the process, which is something that I think you all should be very proud of, the engagement that this community has shown in this planning process. I know I'm pleased with the success we've had so far and hope to continue that as we continue outreach for this plan. And so definitely owe a big thank you to anyone who helped promote or spread awareness of the plan and our engagement opportunities. Next slide, please. All right, so as I mentioned, our technical analysis, but really largely the community input that we've received so far has really been foundational in developing these emerging themes, some of these big ideas, and really the preliminary recommendations that we're examining to carry forward in the planning process. So I'll cover those now. Thank you. So before digging into the details, I want to frame this discussion and presentation with what the community identified as their top future actions that the city could take in terms of parks, recreation, open space, and trails. And the source of this is from the online questionnaire and is also supported with the conversations that we've had with stakeholders. So first is to increase connectivity and trail access throughout the city. Number two, there's interest in constructing an indoor recreation center expansion to the Woodland Aquatic Center. Number three, invest in improvements to Meadowood Sports Complex. Number four, develop a plan to improve and maintain natural surface social trails or just really a natural surface trail system within the city. And five, invest in improvements to Memorial Park. 6, improve trailheads, and 7, develop a mountain bike skills park. So again, the source of these top ranked future actions comes from the community through the online questionnaire. So next I'll spend several minutes covering more detail in terms of specific preliminary recommendations that incorporate each of those actions that are so important to the community. So we'll start with parks. So first up, recommending to continue working towards developing the city's undeveloped parklands, and of course, according to neighborhood preference and input from those communities. Next slide. So during or in the questionnaire and also through focus groups, we asked the community how they would like to see future parkland developed within the city. And so those top 3 preferences are listed here on the slide. And so you can see there's not a lot of desire for a high level of development or amenities in the parks that are currently undeveloped. The community through the questionnaire at least is indicating a stronger desire for more of a natural landscape open space kind of aesthetic that is complemented by amenities like walking trails, picnic tables, shelters, that kind of thing. I will caveat that with just at the time that the city is pursuing development of each of these undeveloped parcels, it'll be really important to reach out again to those neighborhoods where those parklands are situated and really directly engage those community members there. Next slide, please. All right, second recommendation here is to develop a life cycle replacement plan for all of the city's park and recreation assets. And of course, incorporate that into the department and the city's overall capital improvements plan annually. Next. And then finally, identify parks that can facilitate the addition of some of these highly desired amenities that the community has indicated through the questionnaire and through our outreach thus far. And so those include pickleball courts, permanent restrooms. There's a real desire for gathering spaces and especially the kind of spaces that would appeal to teens and young adults. Okay, so now I'll cover a few site-specific recommendations for 2 of the city's largest parks, Memorial Park and Meadowood. The plan will incorporate additional recommendations, but in the interest of time tonight, we're just gonna touch on these 2 parks that have more of a regional draw. Next slide, please. So for Meadowood Sports Complex, those recommendations are to update the 2003 Meadowood Sports Complex Master Plan, of course, incorporating community involvement into that process. to support the Woodland Park Hockey Association efforts to improve the hockey facility and to support efforts to improve Panther Fields. Next slide. And then for Memorial Park, probably the biggest recommendation there is to spend time doing some further additional study to develop a detailed capital improvements plan for that park that will address a lot of the issues that the department is facing that are related to overuse challenges, to tree health, to erosion around the lake there. So it's the primary recommendation for Memorial Park. Next slide. All right, so moving right along to the preliminary recommendations for recreation and aquatics programming. First is to, well, these aren't really necessarily in an order yet, but the first bullet on the slide here is to conduct a feasibility study that will provide a better understanding of a cost estimate related to expanding the aquatic center for indoor recreation as well. So that'd be like constructing a dry side to the aquatic center. And through the online questionnaire, we did ask the community if funding were ever to become available to develop an indoor recreation component to the aquatic center, what would be the top desired amenities? Those are what you see here listed on the slide. So multi-purpose courts and rooms, cardio equipment, rock climbing and bouldering, and a running and a walking track or walking track. And then second recommendation here that we're considering is developing additional opportunities for winter outdoor recreation. So it seems that folks are looking for things to do during this time of year, right, when it's cold and snowy and dark, whether that's moving their fitness inside or having opportunities for things like sledding hills, cross-country skiing or snowshoeing trails, and even community-wide winter events that bring people together during this time of year. Next slide, please. Additional recommendations related to recreation programming, working with the senior center to identify how the community or the city can provide spaces for older adult programming. Next slide. And then implementing programming that meets community demand. So we asked the community to let us know their preferences on a lot of different recreation programming options. And these were the top 4 that sort of rose to the top. So those are arts and crafts classes, plant identification classes. So that's related to opportunities for more like outdoor environmental education, like guided nature walks, that kind of thing. Aquatic fitness, and then more opportunities for adult sport leagues. So that might involve piloting some programs that are maybe more creative or offer different opportunities for adults to engage in recreation programming. And, you know, working to determine what would be successful long-term programs. All right, moving on to trails and connectivity. This is a big one for the community. If you'll remember to just a few slides ago, that top ranked future action from the community is to expand the city's trails system. And the statistics you see in the upper right-hand corner there are out of all of the questionnaire respondents, which was approaching 700, 83% desire more natural surface trails and 76% desire more paved trails. So we'll jump into those recommendations now. So first is to develop a relationship with the U.S. Forest Service in order to plan for trail connections from the city to Pike National Forest, working through the U.S. Forest Service planning process, right? So there are a number of social trails that exist right now that connect from city limits into the National Forest. The Pikes Peak Ranger District doesn't necessarily recognize those as official trails of the Forest Service system. There is a very specific process that the Forest Service follows in order to consider additions to their trail system. And so we're recommending cultivating, developing that relationship with the Forest Service and working with them to plan for those connections. And we, Cindy and I and Jeffrey Webb, who is the chair of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, have started this conversation. We've met with the Pikes Peak Ranger District planner to start initiating those conversations. Related to that is establishing a Woodland Park Trails Task Force. And this would be an entity that will convene local and area trail professionals and advocates that will help guide trail development within the city through advocacy, through fundraising, through potential easement acquisition or leveraging their partnerships to really support the city's development of a trail system. And also very importantly, maintenance, right? So not just maintaining what you have now, but if any future trails are built, there's got to be a way to maintain those, right? And so that is part of what this group would be tasked with. Next slide. And then related to that is establishing a trails coordinator position within the Parks and Recreation Department that could serve as the liaison to the Trails Task Force and really provide the overarching guidance to trail system development within the city. Next slide. And the recommendation, the next, to develop a citywide trail system plan. That would really be truly the first task of a trail system coordinator or a trails coordinator position, right? To take a more detailed look at existing trails within the city, all of the concepts, the proposed trails and ideas and desires of the community for where they want trails to connect, compile that into a single cohesive document, look more closely at where feasible alignments are and assign costs to those, prioritize them, and really develop a work plan that will allow the city to move forward in a systematic way with developing a trail system. And then a couple of additional recommendations that are just related to user experience. So recommending that in areas where the city may have future sidewalks planned in addition to bike lanes, whether those would be constructed by a developer or just in terms of completing gaps in the system, to consider converting that space to either a multi-use path that is separated from traffic or adding a parallel natural surface trail that could allow for cycling adjacent to the sidewalk. So this recommendation is really about just making it more comfortable for the bulk of the population to shift their transportation mode from vehicles to other forms of active transportation. So getting people who are maybe not going to be comfortable with, riding alongside traffic, even if they have, a striped lane, providing the infrastructure that helps them get around the city comfortably. And then finally, ways to improve trail user experience and character through wayfinding signage, trail side interactive elements, and public art. So we've asked the community to identify where their connectivity priorities are. And the top three are listed here on the slide. So number one is the concept of Ring the Park, right? This is a concept that was also the top rated connectivity priority when outreach was conducted for the comprehensive plan a couple of years ago. And so it's still the case. And so it just kind of reiterates that there's a community demand for ways to get around Woodland Park that don't involve getting in a car, right? And so that's continues to be a top priority for the community. Second, we just mentioned this, partnering with the U.S. Forest Service for that national forest to city connectivity. So in my internal dialogue, I call this the park to pike connection, right? So it's, yes, the physical connection between a trail from Woodland Park or trails from Woodland Park to Pike National Forest, but it's before that can happen, there has to be a relationship, right? And so it's that connection, that partnership between the city and the Pikes Peak Ranger District. Yes, sir.
Hey, didn't we go to a meeting about the connections outside of our city, the outdoor Pikes Peak initiative? Isn't that part of what we're talking about to connect to our city?
Certainly could be, and we actually have Becky here with us tonight that did that presentation in Cripple Creek.
Fantastic, yes. Great, and so then third is to work to upgrade the existing American Discovery Trail, which is a portion of the UPass Trail, and work to close the gap, which on the map on the right-hand side is that sort of red dashed line there conceptually. So working closely with county partners to help close that gap. All right, moving on to open space and greenways. The recommendation that we would make here is not very different from the approach that the department is currently taking, which is an opportunistic approach to land acquisition. But it would be to support goals of the city. So preserving high value conservation land as identified through the department's land value rating system. So continuing to use that system. But then also considering potential opportunistic acquisitions that would support future trail development. And so these would be strategic acquisitions along future trail corridors and would help sort of achieve two goals, right? So the conservation goal, but then also providing a location for future trails and preserving a high quality experience within that future trail by conserving the land around it in perpetuity. And then finally, we would absolutely continue to recommend that the Parks and Recreation Department work closely with the Planning Department to consider any opportunities for future acquisition that arise out of development. All right, UPass Cultural Center, two preliminary recommendations here. The first is to continue planning for and budgeting for facility upgrades to maintain the UPCC's competitiveness in the events venue market here in the area. And then next slide, please. To develop a special events budget for city hosted events. So through our community questionnaire and our outreach thus far, we've heard community desire for city organized events like outdoor movies, outdoor concerts, things that bring people together. And developing a special events budget would help to put some parameters around how the city could execute those kind of events and meet that community desire. And so those bullet points there on the slide are those most desired events as identified by the community through the questionnaire. And that information, again, helps the department to understand where to target their programming, where to target their promotional efforts as well. The plan will also contain a sustainability component and we'll consider, and these are not necessarily recommendations on this list, but these are considerations primarily related to future development and maintenance of parks and recreation facilities. And so this will become increasingly important as natural resources like water become more scarce. And ultimately, the goal is translating sustainable maintenance practices into financial sustainability as well. So considering how to be less resource intensive in the way that parks and facilities are maintained, and considering staff also as one of those resources that is part of the equation when it comes to maintenance. So how more sustainable maintenance practices may reduce the time that it takes to complete certain tasks or maintain certain properties, and looking at how that all kind of works together to improve efficiency of the department. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was a lot of ideas and concepts that are important to the community, preliminary recommendations that we are considering moving forward as part of the plan. It's exciting to talk about those, but really the logical question is like, how do we pay for this, right? So one of the ways that this plan will help the department with implementation is after sort of this milestone tonight where we're talking, we'll move forward with assigning cost estimates to a lot of these big recommendations, and that will help us prioritize and work towards identifying where the low-hanging fruit is, where are the projects that are more resource intensive or will take more time, require more partnerships. And so that's one way the plan will help, but there are also additional funding strategies that we hope to expand upon in the plan, some that the city is already using, some that the city is not, and ways to consider new ways to use some of the funding sources that the city is already implementing. So the first of those is obvious, it seems, but it's so important to many of these more catalyst type projects, more of the aspirational projects, and that's leveraging partnerships. And so many of these projects will require leveraging partnerships in ways maybe the city has not done before, building new relationships, rekindling old ones, It's especially important when it comes to grant funding. Great Outdoors Colorado, GOCO is a big funding source for recreation in the state. And it's really shifted towards focusing on a lot of partnerships in the last few years. So I'm very pleased to hear that the city is engaging with the Outdoor Pikes Peak Initiative. That's a fantastic opportunity to start cultivating those partnerships. Partnerships could also take the form of cost sharing for service provision. And that may require a level of trust and commitment, especially if it's with new agencies the city hasn't partnered with before. And then there's also the consideration of how to work with other agencies, including the private sector, for service provision to meet community demands for recreation. And that's out of the acknowledgement that the city's Parks and Recreation Department can't be all things to all people. And so it's part of looking at where are opportunities and partnerships that could continue to serve the community, meet their demands, even if the city itself is not the service provider. Second bullet on the slide, special options sales tax. So several cities and counties in the Front Range employ this as a revenue source for open space trails and parks, not just for acquisition or new development, but also for maintenance of existing assets. I'm sure that you're probably familiar with Colorado Springs TOPS program, and that will go to voters again in April as they seek to extend the duration of that program for another 20 years. But there's also several smaller towns and jurisdictions that employ a sales tax program to fund a lot of their parks and trail development and maintenance. So Breckenridge, town of Erie, the town of Windsor just passed this past November, a dedicated funding source through a sales tax that will, again, not just provide funds for future acquisition and development, but maintaining the assets that they have right now. So that is one option that has come up, sort of on its own in our focus groups that was mentioned. The Parks and Recreation Advisory Board has discussed it. And so that is why it's on the list here tonight. Capital expansion fee. This is an option that could be useful for the city because the city is experiencing development and some residential growth. So the capital expansion fee is essentially packaging your parkland acquisition, development, and a proportionate percentage of maintenance costs into a single fee that's paid by a developer. There are restrictions around the way this fee can be used, but two of the most important caveats are one, that it has to be used for new park development, so it cannot be used for existing life cycle replacements. It has to be used for new parks. And then second is that for neighborhood parks, the fees have to be spent in the geographic area where they are collected. So again, for those undeveloped neighborhood parks, this could be an option as land around those parks develops. And then local lodging tax. This is a relatively new one. Last March, the House Bill 22-117 was signed into law, which expands the allowable uses for local lodging taxes. And so rather than just being allowed to be spent on promoting an area, the tax can now be used for addressing some of the issues that many towns that have heavy tourism economies have been facing. So it can now be used for workforce housing, for childcare, for service workers. But important to this plan, it can be used for facilitating and enhancing visitor experiences and for capital expenditures that are related to facilitating and enhancing visitor experiences. So expanding the use of this revenue source does require approval by voters. But there are municipalities that have already this past November put it on the ballot and have used this new law to expand the way that they are using their lodging tax, primarily for workforce housing. I haven't yet come across a case where a city has used it for outdoor recreation infrastructure. But I imagine since it's less than a year old that we will start to see some of that in the next year. So again, because the intent was to try to help alleviate some of the challenges that, again, heavy outdoor recreation tourism towns we're facing. So overcrowded trailheads, just overuse of trail systems, and some of these more like regional assets just really being loved to death. So that's the intent behind that option. All right, next slide. So that concludes my talking piece. And I'd like to open it up now to questions that you all have or discussion. We can, work our way back through the slides and cover any additional topics that you all feel you would like to discuss. I have, just some questions that I could ask you if we need to guide a discussion, but I'll stop talking now and open it up to the city council. Thank you.
Council, do you have questions or comments? Sure, Robert.
Thanks, Taylor. I just took notes as you're going along, so I'm just going to go through them as they come up on
Absolutely.
my sheet. The first one on your top rank future actions, I was a little surprised to see your second highest priority was the indoor recreation center expansion.
A question. So the source of this is from the community questionnaire. And it's also come up in our focus groups and several discussions. So this is not like a me originated, this is originated from our outreach.
So in terms of maximum use of our area, I think we have a large debt still in that building, and I'm not sure there's going to be an appetite to put that as a high priority. Although Aaron did tell me there's a whole grant thing that you guys are looking at. So I just want to say that from a council perspective and a budget perspective, I'm one vote that says I'm not looking to get into more debt on a building that's expanding its cost to us each year. So just kind of that was my first comment on that.
That's like that way down the road.
It's second in the priority, and I would have think some of the. Oh, good.
So if I may, I just want to remind you that these are survey results, our community outreach results that we're compiling and sharing with you. So when you're saying that you would say no to that, you're saying no to even putting that as a priority in our master plan, which our community is looking for.
Such a high priority, I guess, would be more my comment about that.
Okay.
And sorry, just if I may interject, Cindy, maybe you can provide a little bit of context on the value of this effort in regards to future grant applications and how this is kind of a foundational thing as well.
Sure. So in regards to the master plan overall, is that what you're asking? for?
Overall, and then like the GoCo grants and other
Right.
stuff that we're looking at.
So as you guys may recall, the master plan that we did have was over 11, 12 years old. And so that's why we're going through the process to update that master plan. Also, it's been that long since we went to our community to find out what are your desires? Because in our last master plan, we were able to complete a lot of those projects that were desired by the community then. So by going back to them, we're just putting together some priorities. We're going to throw some numbers to that and put some budget numbers to that, come up with some priorities. But this master plan is really a way for us to meet the goals of any granting sources nowadays, not just even GoCo, but anyone out there is looking regional and they're looking for partners. And so what can Woodland Park do regionally and but also within our city? And then what partners can we bring to the table as well and have those actually documented or recognized in our plan so we can reference our plan when we go after grant dollars to fund some of the projects that we might have. So I've been talking with Great Outdoors Colorado from the very beginning of this master plan to saying, people are wanting projects. They want us to apply for a grant. They want us to finish this master plan before they're going to move any more forward with capital project funding for the city of Woodland Park, because they want to know also what our city and region are looking for and who our partners are. Does that help, Michael?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. It's not only understanding what the community wants to see in the future, but it is foundational to get that grant capacity opened up So, and Taylor, I don't know if you were going to say something else.
A couple clarifications that, again, these are the top ranked future actions from the community questionnaire. We haven't moved to prioritizing anything for the plan yet, but we will. And so that's also part of this process, is hearing exactly the feedback that you're giving me.
Right.
And I also think our recommendation coming out of this is not to definitely move forward with constructing this. It's do the due diligence to pursue a feasibility study, actually understand from an architectural standpoint, what are the costs associated, and be able to make an informed decision about if, then when, right? And like when that capacity could happen. So,
Okay, great.
yeah, thank you.
A couple of other points on that same top ranked future actions. One is what I don't see on your plan at all is any off-road vehicle connectivity to the national forest. And from what I understand, we have lands that are very close to that. And what there isn't, you talk about connectivity, there's a whole group of outdoor recreationalists
Mhm.
who want to see something in that regard. And we could really be a gateway for that and leverage that gateway, because from what I see on the maps, it's spotty, and yet you could create one access point that would really open that up, which is already designated area for that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. And it's not listed in the slides, although we have heard this from the community. I would bundle that into, and we would need to extrapolate on this in the plan itself, into the trails master plan and that whole planning process. Again, just trying to be sensitive to the Forest Service through their planning process, and not necessarily saying what will happen without having gone through that process with them. So, but yes, that has been mentioned. So thank you.
And you might recognize we have a resource here who's been longstanding working with the Forest Service, Drew Stoll. He hasn't been engaged with you. I actually asked him, but he would be a great resource on that, because he's done many hours of work
Perfect.
in that space. So,
That's great. Yeah.
yeah.
We will definitely incorporate him.
Yeah. On number 5, you say invested improvements in Memorial Park. One that kind of tied in with something else you gave earlier was looking at a way for our kids to gather. There's, to my way of thinking, would be a good opportunity, because they're already using Memorial Park as a skateboard location, and it's destroying their skateboards, I'm sure their bodies, and some of the steps that are going on there. So some sort of inclusion of a recreation area there for the youth with skateboarding, and maybe also doing downhill sledding or something, kind of could be for the winter, could kind of tie
Yeah.
the two together. So
Absolutely.
um
Good observation.
you already covered the whole idea of the aquatic center stuff with grants and partnering. The other thing I noticed hiking the Level Gulch recently is there's a real lack of understanding of trail protocol.
Yes.
We had people walking this way, people walking this way, and a cyclist comes barreling down the hill, did not slow at all. And, people jumped, ran for their lives. So we have a lot of trails, and, one thing I'd suggest is maybe look at some designated cyclist trails versus, you could do widening trails, but you could just designate some as cyclist trails and other ones as walking trails.
Yes.
Just the
Separating users. Yeah.
yeah,
Definitely.
because and otherwise, definitely some notice posting of trail etiquette, because I think we get a lot of visitors here and they have no clue, they have
Yes.
no clue.
Yeah.
And so that's just a health risk of life and limb of, hey,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
and
there's-
then the fight that ensues when, all right.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. And we have heard that as well. So,
And
yeah, it's
the
very
other
on
one, of
point.
course, is horses,
Equestrian
yeah,
species. Yeah. Definitely.
For the sake of time, I just want to see council. Is there anyone else that has questions? Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, Robert.
okay, I'm just about done, I think here. The last one was funding strategies. A number of us, well, 3 of us anyway, went to the outdoor Pikes Peak group. Very excited about what they're doing. Highly suspicious because it's coming from the top down, but it is something that we've been looking to do here regional or locally and connecting regionally. So yeah, I guess I move forward with caution on that, but I'm excited to see that that area link is looking good. And I just want to say, I have no appetite for increasing sales tax on our community and other excuses of taxes on a community. I'd like to see it be generated in a different manner. So just as you move forward with your thinking, yeah,
Thank you.
and that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Okay. Anything you want to add? Cindy?
So I just wanted to add a little bit to that. So as far as education for trail use, I wanted to say that every meeting that you go to, if it's tourism, if it's the Outdoor Pikes Peak Initiative, anywhere that you're going that has experienced the demand on our outdoor recreation is saying we need to educate, educate, educate. And so that is something that we didn't do so well in the past, but it seems like that's going to be forefront moving forward in just about everything in outdoor recreation. We also saw it in our questionnaire in those results. And then I was very surprised as well, but it came from our community, the sales tax. And so I think it's something that it's intriguing, at least to look at in the future.
Great. All right, you'll move on to the very last slide. We'll conclude quickly. So if there are no further questions or comments, I'll just wrap up real quickly where we're moving forward. So we'll take the input that you all have provided tonight, refine these concepts and ideas, and then move forward with developing some more concrete goals and actions that can help work towards realizing some of these, or at least provide more context around how the city might accomplish these. We'll assign estimates of probable costs to many of these big recommendations, and that will help us with project prioritization that we'll work through with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, with the community. And that will take place in our next stage of community engagement, which you can expect at this point to probably take place in early March. And so that's sort of where we're headed in the next couple of months, but thank you very much for the additional time tonight. Very much appreciate it and appreciate your support for this project. So
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for the presentation.
Excellent.
Okay, council, we're going to wrap up this work session and then we'll start city council at 7 o'clock.